been pretty fancy instant.
Yeah.
That's way too much.
Yeah, like they're just selling one.
Thank you. How about now? Am I unmuted? Thumbs up of any description would be awesome. Yay! Awesome. Appreciate it. And can I confirm that? Can I confirm as well? I've put the opening slide up on the screen. Can you see that as well? Thumbs up. Awesome. Well, that's great. So I'll try and make this present. We're at 11:04. We are recording this session, so if you have friends who haven't made it, then they'll be able to watch me online later, which I'm sure you understand that fills me with great joy. I have with me on my left Jasper. Wave at
Kia ora. Hey guys.
So he's going to be looking at the Q&A and managing any rogue microphones that are on. So if you haven't already, please put your microphone on mute. All right. Try and make that work. Go. All right, we're into it. Nau mai, haere mai. Welcome to the Electricity Authority's webinar about the consultation on regulating the standardised super peak hedge contract. Ko Jogadi toko ingoa. If you don't know me, I'm a principal analyst in the wholesale markets policy team. I'm pleased you could all make it to the session. There I am. So our agenda today is to firstly run through an introduction and background, including items of relevance to the Energy Competition Task Force, to give you an overview of the issues and options for regulating the standardised super peak hedge contract, and most importantly of all, to give you the opportunity to ask any questions that you might have. So the Energy Competition Task Force was set up in August 2024, and it was composed of 8 initiatives to strengthen the electricity market's performance by enabling new generators and independent retailers to enter and better compete in the market, as well as giving consumers more options. The first package of work included an initiative to develop standardised flexibility products, and we undertook our industry co-design process in late 2024, and that began trading voluntarily in January 2025. So the work on the super peak has been done in concert with other measures. The one that's quite prominent at the moment is plans to introduce mandatory non-discrimination obligations for the gentailers and to consult on code changes to deliver this in October. As well as this, there is plans to consult on a wider review of market making later in November. So for the issues and options paper, we are seeking feedback on the authority's expectations for voluntary trading, Our intention to consider regulation if those expectations are not met for 2 consecutive quarters from January 2026. Our objectives and intended outcomes of the trade in the Super Peak product. 2 options for regulation evaluated against our objectives, one of which is market making on the ASX, another is market making on the OTC, and this latter one is preferred for reasons that are spelled out in the paper. Our rationale, which I just said, our view of circumstances that could warrant an urgent code response. While that's all pretty formal, really want to hear from you. And I'm sure a lot of you are here to hear the questions that everyone else is asking. So we open the floor.
Yeah, so feel free to either enter them in the Q&A section. You'll see that along the top bar there, the third one along from the left. So you can type that in there. Or if you put your hand up, we can organise based on if you're wanting to verbally communicate with us, we can unmute you and we can facilitate your questions that way as well. Always a bit nerve-wracking being the first one.
I almost feel like I should give you a conversation starter, but let's see.
Nothing just yet coming.
Well, I'm going to fill the void and see if someone thinks up any questions. So voluntary trade has been going well. Why are we doing this now? That feels a little bit rhetorical from my perspective. So this product is really new. It began trading on the 1st of January. Oh, sorry, the 29th of January, earlier this year. And it has improved the availability and pricing of Super Peak hedges on the OTC market. We have noticed through our market monitoring that premiums over ASX baseload appear to have improved. And compared to the situation which the risk management review evaluated, it appeared like Super Peak products were relatively more accessible. So we asked the question, is this enough? Is this improvement in liquidity sufficiently deep or liquid? So when you look at the paper and also Appendix A, that liquidity assessment, our monitoring team has done some work to ask the question, is this liquidity enough? And we think it's not. We think that it should be deeper to really have a liquid market with efficient price discovery. And we turn this over to you. What do you think?
Nobody just yet. I know how. Oh, there we go. We've got something in the chat.
Jonathan Hill. Stu. Noting that at the launch of the product, the task force advised that they'll be watching closely and expected Gentiles to provide liquidity. Given the authority has concluded that liquidity is inadequate, could you talk to the rationale for continuing with voluntary arrangements? That's a good point, right? And when we stood up the voluntary setup, we were looking for natural liquidity to emerge. Willing buyers and willing sellers would come to a market and trade. But we had not set at that time what good looks like. So this paper is our version of setting out what good looks like in terms of liquidity. And I think it's important that we do so and consult on it prior to regulating. So this is our stake in the ground. This is what good looks like. We invite you to comment on whether this is good, whether we're setting up our liquidity measures. Maybe you think that they are too strict or too low. So we're seeking feedback on that to establish where is the benchmark, at which point should that market be strengthened.
So we have two more questions, but I think as it pertains to that previous question, we've got that next one there from Nigel, which I believe you can see there.
Nigel, our view is you should give voluntary a chance. Any thoughts from others as to why the voluntary has not been successful to date? That would be a very interesting question, Nigel. I would just fill 30 seconds or so. The liquidity assessment sees that there's a few features, I guess, in the market that that makes it hard to be highly liquid. The bids and offers have quite a wide spread, and the spreads are quite wide. One part. Sorry, I'm not explaining this very well. The bids and offers are quite far apart as well. They're not tightly bound like they are in ASX trading. Now, as you say, we are interested in as to why that is and what settings might be useful to make that more successful. So, to Nigel's point, anyone in the room wish to start a conversation?
Next up, we have from Robert Allen. Has the authority considered the impact that voluntary arrangements would have on the risk to independent electricity retailers relying on access, i.e. less surety of access than mandatory arrangements, and what this would mean to impact on competition?
I have to get my computer up to read that in full. Just give me a second.
Yep. You'll find it under Q&A.
Oh, right.
So it's the bottom one there.
I'll have to join the meeting to see it, I think. Oh, actually, maybe I don't. That'd be possible. And Toby's there. Toby, I see yours as well. If I'm reading you right, Robert, and I might not be, so please correct me if I'm taking the wrong approach to this. The voluntary arrangements we regard as a step better than what was in place beforehand. So the risk that to independent retailers relying on access, I agree with you that voluntary is considered less robust than mandatory. If voluntary can deliver sufficient liquidity, then that should be enough, right? Why regulate if the market is working efficiently without intervention? But again, going back to, is this market liquid enough? And we're interested in your thoughts on where we've set out what good looks like for voluntary, and if this is not met presently, do we need to regulate to improve that surety of access you referenced there? Robert?
Hi, it's Rob here. Yeah, I'm not really sure about that response.
Okay.
the point I was making was, if you're an independent retailer that's relying on the super product to manage your risk and to grow your customer base, you face under voluntary arrangements the risk that your liquidity today could be fine, but will it be fine tomorrow? What happens if the gentailers pull the plug? So that's a big risk that the independent retailers would face under a voluntary arrangement compared to a mandatory arrangement. So my presumption and expectation is that you'd see a far superior competitive outcome if you went straight now to mandatory rather than playing around the edges with the current voluntary arrangements.
Thank you for that clarification, Robert. And I imagine that is, absolutely true. I think we referenced somewhere in the paper, couldn't quite quote the section, that voluntary arrangements, and certainly in base load, have proved fragile, particularly at times of supply stress. So this is something that we are quite aware of, and I'm sure the market is aware of it. And for that reason, what we've put in place, well, not put in place, we're also consulting on that should that liquidity and shaped hedges completely dry up. I think you had a slightly different terms that there are some levers that can be used in this case, and that would be an urgent code amendment. So we're also consulting on the shape of that.
Yeah, and independent retailers would face a large amount of regulatory uncertainty about what those thresholds would look like for when the authority would investigate, let alone what the basis of the decision to move to a urgent code change would be. So that's a large amount of regulatory uncertainty, and a key message that we hear time and time again from the authority is that regulatory uncertainty is a bad thing, and how it adversely impacts on the efficient operation of the market and how it adversely impacts on investment. So this seems like a very good area where it would be quite straightforward for the Electricity Authority to provide regulatory certainty for both access seekers and access providers by setting out the rules from the get-go.
That's really useful, and I'm sure that your submission will reflect that. I think one of our questions does go straight into that. Do you think we should continue with voluntary first, or should we push forward with regulation? Be next.
Yeah, I will do a bit of jumping around because I know just with the nature of the flow of the conversation, some people may be raising questions relating to what we're currently discussing, but to ensure that everyone's questions are captured, we'll jump to Toby, and then there's a follow-up question to that one, and then we can jump back to whoever was next in the questions.
All right, Toby, with respect to proposed market-making spreads, we do not intend to apply a volatility-based settings adjustment. This is because relief mechanisms can be correlated with poorer market outcomes. We consider a single bid-ask spread of 5% to be appropriate. Could you expand on the poorer market outcomes and how you would weigh those against the benefits of having a narrower BAU spread with a wider spread based on high volatility periods? The bit you reference comes from the and I can't remember if it was in the consultation paper, but it was in the decision paper for the urgent code amendment, where we considered those, we had in place temporarily a wider spread at high price levels, and the consultation paper that we ran about that, should it be put in place permanently or not, and the subsequent decision found that it would be correlated with poor market outcomes. So this the statement in the paper is consistent with that prior work, and most of that prior work is available online. I know that's a little bit weak, but I just don't have the data in front of me for that.
And we have a follow-up to that question from Josh.
Josh Signal?
Yep.
How did you arrive at the proposed market making settings? Thanks, Josh. So it is quite tricky. This is a really new market, and we looked at how the baseload market arrived at their settings, and also how they evolved over time. We also looked at the Appendix A liquidity assessment of what the effective bid-ask spreads was available in trading at the moment for the standardised super peak, and we took into account the PAL report as well, which, excuse me, is, I think, Appendix B. So the PAL report suggested, I think it was around 4.5 or 5%. So for a bid-ask spread. So we've looked at that, and we looked at the real-world experience and the liquidity assessment, and we found that that was achievable, but not consistently. The volumes were a little bit more uncertain, and so while we had some information about how much was necessary, and where we talk about that in the paper around what would the effective super peak volume be if every independent retailer bought super peak for their profile. So we did consider that, but also not every independent retailer wants to buy super peak. They might prefer to buy a fully shaped product. So we couldn't necessarily use that number explicitly. So we have put a stake in the ground around what would be appropriate, and that is also informed by the PAL report, which suggested a volume. I think that they suggested 10 to 15 megawatts, and we've gone towards the lower end of that. Hopefully that answers Josh's question.
And then still in the Q&A section, before we jump to Craig's question, we've got from Simon, which I think you'll be able to see just below Josh's most recent one there.
Cool, I can see Simon's. So the paper discusses that independent retailers would have to go back into the market for several days, even months in a row, to purchase NAF super peak contracts to cover their whole exposure. Why is this used as an example when no one would use only super peak contracts to cover their exposures? Yeah, and I mentioned that in the answer to the prior question. It is only one benchmark, and we can't make assumptions about how one might hedge it. And I agree with you that you would need to use a combination. You might have a certain fully shaped product from one party, but you might be topping up in, say, August or September if you need a bit more cover during those colder peak months. So while it is one volume, we are consulting on what the right number is and whether there is more information out there as to what the right number is. So we don't have all the answers, and we are relying on industry to tell us what that number should be. To the chat?
Yep, yeah, to the chat now with Craig's question there.
Is the EA considering formalising platform provider arrangements to enhance trading session outcomes? Processes currently have a high manual component which creates friction. I think this paper this timing is really important, that we consider what is the pathway going forward. Are we maintaining voluntary only, or are we stepping forward into regulating? And if we're regulating, how are we doing it, so that we can figure out the right pathway to ensure the best possible trading for those participants. So in other words, let's set out the long game first, and then we'll work out what the best short game is. Don't think that's Craig's question. Okay, Craig, do you want to turn off your mic and clarify?
Well, Nigel thinks I haven't been answered. I'm essentially saying, are you in parallel, are you looking to formalise arrangements with even if it stays voluntary, are you going to get the platform to lift its game? You're going to put some onus on them. Currently, there's no service agreement. It's totally like they want a random kind of vote. Yeah. You're going to go, hey guys, this is what we expect. This is the minimum viable product. This is the service level expectation, boom for. Because there's no development pipeline, right? And, okay. Yeah. Dan's not on the phone, so he can't defend himself, but that's kind of a question.
Yep. And not one, obviously, I'm going to answer here, but I'll certainly note that point that that you're interested in the development pipeline, and also a bit more structure to, as you say, this was stood up quickly, and Aotearoa Energy did pull something together in about 2 weeks, I think, probably. So things have, again, what's the long game? What does good look like if we're going? If we're still looking at voluntary for it through to at least June, what does good look like there? Because that gives a platform provider reason to invest. Whereas if it's only a year, then you might choose not to. Right? So I will take that away though, because even if it stays voluntary only, that what you're saying is that it needs to be better than it is.
I guess where the rubber hits the road to the point of the whole concept or the whole paper is essentially I'm suggesting, and anecdotally, that it's creating friction in trading. It's going to affect liquidity and volume ultimately. You're just not going to have people reacting quick enough and getting on the bid and offer and just doing all the stuff that traders do if the process on the platform is, I don't know, has friction in it.
Yeah.
If you like. Thank you.
No, thank you for that detail.
Great. The next one up is back in the Q&A section. We've got one from Robert Allen just 3 minutes ago. So it's the second one. It will appear on your list of Q&As there.
Can you clarify the threshold for considering regulation? The references you've got there are there's two specific kinds of regulation that are in the paper. The first is if liquidity, I think the reference for if liquidity does not improve to a sufficient level is the one for normal regulation, where we do a full consultation, and we spell out the threshold for considering regulation in section 4. That table 1 framework for assessing liquidity and our expectations. So under the normal regulation, if you like, we would be assessing it against that table 1, and we would be consulting on a code change as a result. Now, the other points you make around the shaped hedge trading suddenly collapse, that's about the potential for urgent code response. So that is covered in section 8. So the urgent code response has a higher threshold because, as you're probably aware, urgent code can be put in place without consultation. but it recognises the importance of a functioning hedge market, including for shaped products, and its importance for independent retailers, among others, and price discovery for the supply of flexible generation. So that is a somewhat undefined point. However, that point would be quite considerably disruptive for the whole market. But I think the point you're trying to make is that's not a clear regulatory threshold and provides regulatory uncertainty for when or if the regulator might intervene.
All right, and then next up is that question from Toby Stevenson there in the Q&A section.
Thinking about regulatory uncertainty, you propose further interventions, urgent regulation, if the current proposal does not produce the intended results. At which point would you do a cost-benefit analysis of whether those interventions would achieve the stated goals or not? If you're talking about urgent regulation, as you may know, can be put in place without assessing costs and benefits. However, it can only be put in place for, if I recall correctly, 9 months. And in order to make that permanent, you would need to assess costs and benefits against that. However, urgent regulation would not be a it's not intended to be an enduring solution, regardless of whether we needed to urgently intervene. That would be a temporary measure before enduring regulation is put in place as per the options table in the paper. Hopefully that answers Toby's question.
Great, and then still in the Q&A section we've got there from Anthony is our next question.
Is the EA investigating the data on participation and seeking to understand drivers for parties who are currently not involved, especially independent retailers? That's an interesting question. We have looked at the data for participation. Obviously, it's not things we can publish here. We have also done some surveys of participants about how they're finding the market. But we really are hoping that the independent retailers or the parties who are not currently involved do submit on these questions. I think there is a question specifically for them to describe any barriers they might be experiencing, and we are very interested in that, in those points.
I see Josh has also posted a question that's relating to that one. I wonder if you'd like to review that one though to see if there's any further expansion on that question.
Josh's question?
Yeah, just above that one you'll see.
Oh yeah. Yes, I mean, I have a similar feeling as Josh and Anthony, and I really am interested in what comes out of this consultation, whether there's things that we don't know about yet. Because if in one version of the world, this is me digressing a little bit, the co-design group came up with a product that they thought would be useful. If the trading is not benefiting the wider market, then why are we doing this? So I think that's a really good question to ask, and I'm really looking forward to reading your responses.
It gets us up to date on the questions thus far, so just give it a moment for any further.
Hey Joe, Nigel from Contact here. I just posted up a question. A lot of your recommendations come out of the principal economics paper. Is there a chance to ask the authors of that paper questions about how they came to their recommendations?
If you do have questions for them, I would suggest you put it in your submission so that we can pass that along. But I think what you're actually asking for is you'd like to be able to talk to them and to be able to explore some of the detail in there. Is that right?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, just
Yeah.
yes, understanding some of the concepts that they've used to come up with their recommendations might be quite useful.
Well, I certainly can consider that. So I'll take that away and determine if that's possible, if that's okay, Nigel.
Okay, yeah, no worries. Thank you.
Thank you.
And if you refresh the Q&A, there's just one at the top there. Just from title is SI.
Could you talk about, thanks Stu, could you talk about how this is dovetailing into the review later in the year? That's a really important point. So the submissions close on the 30th of September, and any material that you put into these submissions, that review that's coming out later in the year, we'll have the opportunity to review those comments prior to publishing their consultation paper. So this work is seeking to establish what good looks like in isolation, whereas the wider market making review will take that input and think about the whole market, how much is required. So I think the word dovetailing is particularly accurate in this sense.
Up to date at the moment, so we'll just give them a moment to ponder any further questions.
All right, I think that might be a wrap. Obviously, thanks for coming along. Thanks for taking the time. Your questions, as always, are thought-provoking, and I'm sure you'll give the submission some really good content for us to consider. Oops, sorry, that didn't work. Zoom to see if that works. Oh, there we go. So if we've missed anything, please include it in your submission. Submissions are closed at 5 p.m. on Tuesday, 30th of September. So that is just 2 weeks away. Two and a half.
Yeah.
2.5 weeks. Written submissions can go to taskforce@ea.gov.nz, and Jasper will be monitoring that inbox. We certainly look forward to reading those.
Yep. And just to confirm, this meeting has been recorded for the purpose of us to be able to publish it, and we'll also be documenting those questions and answers and publishing those on the project page. We'll contact those that were registered as attendees directly, just to notify you that that has been shared and has been published, and then we'll post something a bit broader for those that weren't able to attend, so to ensure that they're able to view the questions and answers.
All right, thanks for attending. It's lovely to talk, and I look forward to hearing from you and your submissions. Bye.
Thank you.